Okay, going on with Mandela's testimony before the court. As far as the Communist Party is concerned, and if I understand its policy correctly, it stands for the establishment of a state based on the principles of Marxism. The Communist Party sought to emphasize class distinctions, while the ANC seeks to harmonize them. This is a vital distinction. It is true that there has often been a very close cooperation between the ANC and the Communist Party. But cooperation is merely proof of a common goal. In this case, the removal of white supremacy. And it is not proof of a complete community of interests. The history of the world is full of similar examples. Perhaps the most striking is the cooperation between Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union in the fight against Hitler. Nobody but Hitler would have dared to suggest that such cooperation turned Churchill or Roosevelt into communists. Theoretical differences amongst those fighting against oppression is a luxury we cannot afford at this stage. What is more, for many decades, communists were the only political group in South Africa prepared to treat Africans as human beings and their equals, who were prepared to eat with us, to talk with us, to live with us, and to work with us. They were the only group which work with the Africans for the attainment of political rights and a stake in society. Because of this, there are many Africans who today tend to equate freedom with communism. They are supported in this belief by a legislature which brands all exponents of democratic government and African freedom as communists. And bans many of them who are not communists under the suppression of the Communism Act. Although I have never been a member of the Communist Party, I myself have been imprisoned under the act. I have always regarded myself in the first place as an African patriot. Today, I am attracted by the idea of a classless society, an attraction which springs in part from Marxist reading and in part from my admiration of the structure of early and earlier African societies. The land belonged to the tribe. There were no rich or poor, and there was no exploitation. We all accept the need for some form of socialism to enable our people to catch up with advanced countries of this world and to overcome their legacy of extreme poverty. But this does not mean we are Marxists. I have gained the impression that communists regard the parliamentary system of the West as reactionary. But on the contrary, I'm an admirer. The Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, the Bill of Rights are documents held in veneration by Democrats throughout the world. I have great respect for some British institutions and for the country's system of justice. I regard the British Parliament as the most democratic institution in the world, and the impartiality of its judiciary never fails to arouse my admiration. The American Congress, that country's separation of powers, as well as the independence of its judiciary, arouses in me similar sentiments. I have been influenced in my thinking by both West and East. I should tie myself to no particular system of society other than of socialism. I must leave myself free to borrow from the best of the West and the best from the East. Our fight is against real and not imaginary hardships, or to use the language of the state prosecutor, so-called hardships. Basically, we fight against two features which are the hallmarks of African society, African life in South Africa, and which are entrenched by legislation. These features are poverty and the lack of human dignity, and we do not need communists or so-called agitators to teach us about these things. South Africa is the richest country in Africa and could be one of the richest countries in the world. But it is a land of remarkable contrasts. The whites enjoy what may be the highest standard of living in the world, whilst Africans live in poverty and misery. Poverty goes hand in hand with malnutrition and disease. Tuberculosis, all sorts of diseases bring death and destruction of health. The complaint of Africans, however, is not that they are poor and the whites are rich, but that the laws which are made by the whites are designed to preserve this very situation. There are two ways to break out of poverty. The first is by formal education, and the second is by the worker acquiring greater skills at his work and thus higher wages. As far as Africans are concerned, both these avenues of advancements are deliberately curtailed by legislation. Now, please remember, this is Nelson Mandela speaking here. This is, during his testimony in 1964. The government has always thought to hamper Africans in their search for education. There is compulsory education for all white children at virtually no cost to their parents, be they rich or poor. African children, however, generally have to pay far more for schooling than whites. Approximately 40% of African children in the age group 7 to 14 do not attend school at all. For those who do, the standards are vastly different from those afforded to white children. Only 5,600 children in the whole of South Africa passed their junior certificates in 1962, and only 362 passed matric. This is presumably consistent with the policy of Bantu education, about which the present Prime Minister said, "When I have control of native education, I will reform it so that the natives will be taught from childhood to realize that equality with Europeans is not for them." People who believe in equality are not desirable teachers for natives. When my department controls native education, it will know what class of higher education a native is fitted, and whether he will have a chance in life to use that kind of knowledge. Other main obstacles to advancement of the African is the industrial color bar, under which all manner of jobs of industry are reserved for whites only. Moreover, Africans do obtain employment in the unskilled and semi-skilled occupations open to them are not allowed to form trade unions which have any kind of recognition. This means that they are denied the rights of collective bargaining, which is permitted to the better paid white workers. The government answers its critics by saying that Africans in South Africa are better off than the inhabitants of other countries in Africa. I do not know whether this statement is true, but even if it is true, as far as the African people are concerned, it is irrelevant. Our complaint is not that we are poor by comparison with people in other countries, but that we are poor by comparison with the white people in our own country, and that we are prevented by legislation from altering this imbalance. The lack of human dignity experienced by Africans in this is the direct result of such policy. White supremacy implies black inferiority. Legislation designed to preserve white supremacy entrenches this notion. Menial tasks in South Africa are invariably performed by Africans. When anything has to be carried out or cleaned, the white man will look around for an African to do it for him, whether the African is employed by him or not. Because of this sort of attitude, whites tend to regard Africans as a separate breed. They do not look upon them as people with families of their own. They do not realize that they have emotions, that they will fall in love like white people do, that they will want to be with their wives and children like white people want to be with their wives and children, that they want to earn enough money to support their families properly, to feed and clothe them, and to send them to school. And what kind of houseboy or garden boy or laborer can ever hope to do this? Past laws render any African liable to police surveillance at any time. I doubt whether there's a single African male in South Africa who has not had a brush with the police over this pass. Hundreds and thousands of Africans are thrown into jail each year under these pass laws. Even worse is the fact that pass laws keep husband and wife apart and lead to the breakdown of all family life. Poverty and the breakdown of family have secondary effects. Children wander the streets because they have no schools to go to, no money to enable them to go, and no parents at home to see that they go, because both parents, if there are two, have to work to keep the family alive. This leads to the breakdown in moral standards, to an alarming rise in illegitimacy, and to violence which erupts not only politically, but elsewhere. Life in the townships is dangerous. Not a day goes by without somebody being stabbed or assaulted. And violence is carried out of the townships into the white living areas. People are afraid to walk the streets after dark. Housebreakings and robberies are increasing despite the fact that the death sentence can now be imposed for such offenses. Death sentences cannot cure this festering sore. Africans want to be paid a living wage. Africans want to perform work which they are capable of doing, and not work which the government declares them to be capable of. Africans want to be allowed to live where they obtain work, and not to be endorsed out of an area because they weren't born there. Africans want to be allowed to own land in places where they work, and not to be obliged to live in rented houses which they can never call their own. Africans want to be a part of the general population and not confined to living in their own ghettos. African men want to have their wives and children to live with them where they work and not be forced into an unnatural existence in men's hostels. African men want to be with their menfolk and not left permanently widowed in those reserves. Africans want to be allowed out after 11 o'clock at night and not be confined to their own rooms like little children. Africans want to be allowed to travel in their own country and seek work where they want to and not where the labor bureau tells them to go to. Africans just want a share of the whole of South Africa. They want security and a stake in society. Above all, we want equal political rights, because without them, our disabilities will be permanent. I know this sounds revolutionary to the whites in this country, because the majority of voters will be Africans. This makes the white man fear democracy. But this fear cannot be allowed to stand in the way of the only solution which will guarantee racial harmony and freedom for all. It is not true that the enfranchisement of all will result in racial domination. Political division based on color is entirely artificial, and when it disappears, so will the domination of one color group over another. The ANC spent half a century fighting against racialism. When it triumphs, it will not change that policy. This then is what the ANC is fighting for. Their struggle is truly a national one. It is a struggle of the African people inspired by their own suffering and their own experience. It is a struggle for the right to live. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope people will live for and achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal which I am prepared to die for. So this was Mandela's speech in front of the court in 1964. Now, needless to say, things did not work out in terms of the reduction of crime, in terms of this whole vision that he had in South Africa. Essentially, it's not so much that the whites still control all of South Africa. They don't, but the entire capitalist, or let's say robber baron capitalism, has infected the South African black leadership as well, and so corruption flourishes now. And so that is the sad legacy now of South Africa. I wouldn't necessarily call it the legacy of Mandela, but the legacy of, historical events. And one of those historical events was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the complete hubris by Western powers, Western industrialists, and multinational corporations to take over the globe with equal disregard for human rights. These are not necessarily based on racial lines at all, but they are based on class, and they are based on rich versus poor, and essentially the distribution of income in world society has never been greater, really, in recorded history. So that is not only the legacy now playing itself out in South Africa, but it's also playing itself out in the Western world as well. So yeah, that's my commentary on as far as Nelson Mandela is concerned. He's only one man. It was only one movement, and we shall see how this all plays out. Because I have the feeling there will be many many revolts to come. Some of them nonviolent, some violent, and this is our enduring legacy as a human species, it seems. So, if you witness the uprisings in Cambodia, the garment workers in Cambodia, over the last few days, this is just another continuous struggle for ordinary people to live with dignity, and their fight for living wages. These sorts of fights continue in all countries. In Western countries, we have a higher standard of living, so we try to fight for what we have already gained, when in reality everything is being taken away and being placed into some sort of much lower common denominator. And so we should show some solidarity with these people and garment workers in Cambodia and Bangladesh and so on, because if we don't, we're gonna end up pretty soon in the very position that they're in right now.